Lynne?
Well, I would just like to say, contrary to Murray's assertion that the scene in the 90s was an adolescent scene, it might seem like that to somebody who was a little younger, but I entered the LA poetry scene in the 70s. And there was a very lively scene going on at that time, and I was young then. I was younger than most of the poets who were prominent at that time, so I was the adolescent. And the scene back then centered largely around Beyond Baroque, which was the big series that everybody came to. It had an open mic as well as a featured reading both on Friday nights. It was originally over on what is now at King Boulevard. That's when I started there, and then it moved over here. And there were a few other series around town, but there weren't as many of them as there were later on. I even curated a series at Spark next door here in the late 70s. And I think the scene back then was partly driven by the fact that there was a lot of funding then. There were NEA grants, there were magazines like Baki, which was a beautiful looking coffee table book type magazine because it got NEA funding and it was just spectacular looking. And then when some of that funding died out in the 80s, the scene just seemed to diminish, and I fell out of it. So when I came back in the 90s, it was not an easy time period in my life. A lot of difficult stuff was going on then. And trying to get back into the scene in the 90s, I had the problem of being somebody who had 3 published books, a lot of magazine credentials, and nobody knew who I was because the scene of the 70s had not really carried over. Some of the people who had been big in the 70s were still teaching, but many of the people in the 90s, it seemed, didn't know about the people from the 70s or earlier, and C. Bill Moore's book hadn't come out yet. And yes, it was a very exciting scene. There were all these coffee houses, and it did seem like the rigidity of the 70s scene had been blown open. I do have to say that Beyond Baroque in the 70s was kind of rigid. There was a certain house aesthetic. Certain people just didn't go over well. I can think of a lot of people who are popular today who would not have been popular Beyond Baroque in the 70s. They were just kind of booed off the stage, you know. And in the 90s, it really started opening up a lot because I think of the coffee houses and because of slams, because of MTV having poets. You know, it was really just opening up, like it could be anything. That was great, but the problem of reestablishing myself, you know, that was a monumental thing. So Next magazine, actually, I was just thinking about this as I was coming over here earlier this evening. I really do think Next was a major thing for me to get involved with it. I realized that anybody could contribute an article to it. And the first article I sent in is, oddly enough, the one that's in this book. As I wrote an article about how I really felt poets needed to be more supportive of each other. And the article was called Why Can't We Be Friends? And I was very pleased the article appeared. And after that, I started regularly reviewing books for Next. In the process of reviewing people's poetry books, I discovered some new poets and made some new friends that way. And I must say that not everybody reviewed in Next was always positive. When I'm a reviewer, I try to say nice things about what people do. If something's really bad, I don't want to have to write an article saying this is really bad. But there were people who wrote articles in Next, you know, where they thought something was crap, they said so. And in fact, when I put out a spoken word cassette in '97, somebody reviewed it, I don't remember who, but it was not that positive for review either. So that was the break. So, you know, not everybody was friendly with everybody in terms of being supportive in that way, but I think people just tried to be honest. And that was the good thing, is that Next was bringing people together with letting people know who had a book out, who had a reading going on. If you didn't get to a reading, you could read a review of somebody's reading and find out whether you missed a good reading or not. There was, of course, the calendar that told you, like, it's still going on with Poetics, but it was the same kind of calendar on the 2 central pages of Next. You've got a month there, you could see every reading that had been sent in going on that month. And then the next issue, you'd find out how those readings went. And then there was a great letters column. I'm very excited because, yeah, I mean, all sorts of feuds happened in that letters column. I remember a woman writing in saying that she didn't like page poets and that people rejected her. And then my friend Carol Lewis, who no longer lives in LA, but she wrote a letter in saying that, you know, good things happen at readings too. Sometimes you get a poem discovered there, so don't be discouraged. And there were a lot of letters that went back and forth regarding a certain event. What was that event where everybody goes for a picture?
LA Spoken.
LA Spoken, yeah. That's supposed to bring people together, and it ended up having several months of angry letters and next magazine after it happened.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, because it has something to do with taking place in the Scientology Center. So
no, actually, one of the things, I remember this clearly. There was someone who was promoting a reading in Yorba Linda at the Nixon Library on the exact same day. And the month after the LA Spoken, they had written a letter to Next, which was this huge just rant, which I'm sure you wanted to include in there. Which I thought was disrespectful for the organizers, Mauro Montero, Jaylene Sun, and Garland Thompson. Yeah, so, they were a little peeved that the LA Spoken got all this press and got all this attendance where their reading in Yorba Linda in Orange County was very sparsely attended. And when you were talking about little feuds that played out in the letters column, yeah, I remember contributing to that because I had written in a letter in rebuttal to their rant that, if they want to have a well-attended reading, they should promote it pretty much on the level of an LA Poetry Slam, or do a better job of promoting it. I pretty much have the same issue with slams as well.
Okay, is that your turn? Is that your turn yet?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just wanted to finish, yeah. So I just wanted to say in conclusion that to me, I was a little disappointed when Next had to cease publishing in '98. I understood that it was a tough thing to do, and nobody else really stepped up to do anything quite like it again. But I think that during the '90s, it was a big, to take out the X of Next, it was a net. Before we had too much internet involvement, it was bringing people together, even if it was to sometimes have feuds. And for me personally, it enhanced my own feelings that I was able to meet more people through Next, to have a little bit more pride through writing for Next. I got a little more recognition for myself that way. And I think we still have a legacy from that. And I was very glad for this book to come out this year that shows how many different people wrote for the magazine and how much was going on at that time. Okay, that's it.